And we are off. Hi, gang. We're back. It's Friday. Whoops, I'm not supposed to date them. I don't care. I date them anyway. Friday, May 2nd. Mayo de dos. Not, or dos de mayo. I'm trying to be funny here and it's not working because Monday, Cinco de Mayo. And Monday will be episode 500 of the All Dolphins podcast. Today is 499. And it's just as special because I have on as a guest a good friend of mine, a national draft expert to get an outside view of the Dolphins draft. I'm talking about no other than Fran Duffy. How are you, Fran?
Alan, I'm doing great. Now I'm even better because I'm spending my the middle of my Friday talking to you.
Aw, I didn't even pay him to say that, by the way. Uh, Fran does fantastic work for PHLY Eagles as well, covering the Eagles and then covering the draft for the All City Network. I got
That's
that
right.
right?
Nailed it. You nailed it.
Okay, took me a long time to memorize it. I'm not that quick. Um, so all joking aside, the Miami Dolphins, based on the national grades, first of all, which I don't know about you, which I think I would say are very unfair because again, we don't know. It's based on usually need versus where the prospects were projected, and then there's a lot of individual bias included
Yes.
because if you had a guy you really liked and he was picked high, well, that's a great pick. But be that as it may, there's certainly an analysis to be provided, and Fran is the guy to do it from a non-Dolphin media perspective. So let me start by asking you: overall, the Dolphins made 8 picks. How did you think they did in terms of adding quality players to their roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was a solid job overall, and they've been pretty steadfast with saying that hey, we're going to go best player available. So while it was a surprise that they didn't address corner early in the draft or really like throughout the meaningful part of the draft, this is par for the course with what we've come to expect from Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel. Certainly since they've been together, I know McDaniel talked about that out at the combine. Was just like like we are on the same wavelength when it comes to just acquiring the best players available when we are up on the clock. And it's funny, it's when you talk about the draft grades, everybody will say, oh, the best way to do it is best player available. But then the moment a team doesn't go best player available and they select need, and it's like, well, if you don't select the needs, then the draft grades are bad. So there's that incongruency there that I always found to be really ironic. But they stay true to their word. They went best player available, but based off their board, right? And we'll talk through some of these picks, but I thought they did a solid job process wise.
Yeah, and it also happened that the Dolphins addressed big needs, pun intended, with their first 2 picks with Kenneth Grant and Jonah S. I'll leave you the fun of pronouncing his last name because I have a hard time with him. I mastered Tango Vailoa pretty quickly. I don't know if it's the double I.
You'll get this one. It's not too bad.
Go ahead and educate me.
Savanaia.
Okay. And they filled major needs, both of them, because they were screaming for a defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman. They were screaming for an interior offensive lineman. You mentioned the cornerback. They didn't address that. Part of the reason was that they moved up to take Jonah S. See, I can't even remember it. Jonah S. in the second round, which precluded them from doing that. And they had the Jalen Ramsey situation hovering over their head. And let's get this out of the way before we dive into the draft picks, because you cover the Eagles very extensively, and I know it's been thrown out there. Please tell the good folks why there's no way in hell the Eagles would trade for Jalen Ramsey.
Just money wise, the Eagles they're not going to be in the market for somebody. There's certainly like that for Jalen Ramsey, like with what he would want to command salary wise. But they moved on from C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They're in the process of potentially moving on from Dallas Goedert because of money. They made their choices early on this offseason. All right, we're gonna pay Saquon Barkley with what he's due. We're gonna pay Zach Bond, extend him, but you let Josh Sweat go. You let Milton Williams go. I already mentioned some of these other veterans that I think from a cash standpoint, they've been so cash forward over the last several years. We're talking like over a decade plus where, they're on the forefront of making sure that this organization is pumping out a lot of cash, where at some point you're going to have that transition year, kind of take your deep breath, especially knowing that they've got some high-priced rookies that are getting ready to come off those deals. And so they have to save some cash down the line for those contracts. Jalen Hurts is going to be up again here sooner rather than later. So, I don't think they're in a position right now to be trading for Jalen Ramsey.
And you left out the part from Miami that Jalen Ramsey, after Vic Fangio left,
Yeah,
was
that
not
too.
exactly
Yeah, that's a good
complimentary
point.
of him. So
Valid
not
point.
happening. Which again, I don't want to take a shot at other media outlets, but be careful when you see people throwing out their stuff like Devontae Smith and pick number 32 for
Yeah.
Jalen Ramsey and pick number 13.
Yeah. A million reasons why that makes no sense.
It completely made no sense. Like, it was just, let me throw something against the wall.
Right.
Chances are I will get clicks, but it was never really grounded in reality. Okay, so let's move on from that particular situation. Let's go over those picks one by one. How much did you like or not like Kenneth Grant as a prospect coming in?
I liked his talent and I like the profile. I think when we talked about this last time I was on, Chris Greer certainly has a type when you're talking like early rounds in the draft. They are very, more often than not, it's going to be young players from Power Five schools, typically that have traits, right? And it's like, you're checking those three boxes in the large majority of their picks, round one, round two, round three. And when you're looking at Kenneth Grant, he checks all of those boxes. He's a big body defensive tackle. He's got really light feet. People throw out the term like dancing bear. Like he is that guy. He was on the freaks list with Bruce Feldman at the Athletic before he ever played a down at Michigan. So is regarded as one of the top athletes in college football before he ever played a snap for the Wolverines. Now, only a one-year starter. We know that they had a really good defensive line in that national championship run in 2023. So didn't really become a full-time guy until this year. But I think anyone I've spoken with in that program spoke highly of Kenneth Grant, the work ethic, like character-wise, everything's good there. You talk about the traits. The production was solid on a per snap basis. When you look at it, it's not like eye-popping numbers. 7 TFLs, 3 sacks this year, 5 TFLs, 3.5 the year before. Nothing that's like makes you go wow, but on a per snap basis, it was fine. I think the big thing with Grant is the whole ever going to become more than the sum of the parts, right? That I think is the lone question that kept him from being seen as universal, like top 15 pick. If you're looking strictly off upside, yeah, you're going to be excited about Kenneth Grant this high in the draft. I was a little bit lower on him just because, I was like, obviously all range of outcomes. Yeah, he could become a Pro Bowl defensive tackle, but I thought it was more likely that he just becomes like a solid star, like a good player, but maybe not like that truly dominant force on the interior. And if you're going to take him in the top 15, you want him to be the latter. You want him to be that like down to down, Dexter Lawrence type of presence in the middle. And I just didn't know if he was ever going to get there. I think he's one of those guys who you just kind of like, you want that someone to light that fire under him to show like, hey, like you've got the ability to dominate every single play. Go out and do it, kind of thing. So the upside is certainly there. I get taking the swing where they did. Would I have done it? Probably not, but I get where they got to that conclusion.
Yeah, and for me, my perfect scenario would have been to be able to trade down to, I don't know, 2021. And then the question becomes, would Kenneth Grant still have been there at 2021?
Right.
And because that's obviously something we'll never know, because it's not like, I don't know that it's going to come out like, yeah, we would have taken Kenneth Grant at 15 or 16, because generally speaking, teams are going to be like, we got who we wanted.
Right.
Highest player on their board is who we got, basically.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, all right, well, how different was the grade between Kenneth Grant and Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon, right? The other guys that went in that area. Derek Harmon went 21 to the Steelers. Walter Nolan went 16 to the Arizona Cardinals. So if you're looking at all three of those players, like me personally, I had Grant lowest on that tier of that group. Other people, would have had differently. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins had him number one in that group, and so it really just came down to how you view it. And if the grades were very, very similar, a lot of teams would say, all right, well, if you had the opportunity to trade back, and I guess I don't know if they had the opportunity to, but if you had the opportunity to trade back and you had all those guys very close together, that's probably the more prudent move.
Correct. And this is what I was advocating for before the draft. The potential risk is you trade down a certain distance and then you lose all three of those defensive tackles.
Right.
Which may have been what you really wanted to address, particularly after once the Dolphins were on the board. You kind of your tier one offensive lineman, Will Campbell, Armand Membu, and Kelvin Banks Jr. were all off the board.
Yep.
And even Tyler Booker, who I thought never made sense.
No.
13 personally. I don't like for all of the praise that he's getting as a prospect in terms of a leader and all that physicality he brings and all that. He's still a guard and purely a guard. And for me, a guard at 12 is a flat out no for me.
I was okay. I'm okay with it. I just didn't like
Are
the
you?
scheme fit. I just didn't like the scheme fit in Miami. Like when I think of the way that Miami plays and Mike McDaniel, everything is lateral. Everything is like, sideline to side, and we can get into maybe that needs to change, right? And then that would signify a change in that area. But when I look at Dallas and I think of the way that team wants to play, I get on board with that kind of addition. But for that's why the Tyler Booker never made sense for me with Miami either.
Yeah, and this is something that I don't know. I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast, and I don't know that I stress it enough for those. And I'm part of the group who complain about the Dolphins' lack of success in short yardage running situations. Is again their scheme, as you mentioned, is lateral. It's about spreading the defense out. Well, on 3rd and 1, generally speaking, everybody's close to the box. It needs to be straight ahead, and the Dolphins are not necessarily built for that. And the prime example of that is their center Aaron Brewer, who is as athletic and mobile as any center in the NFL, but he's not a power guy.
Right.
And that becomes a problem. So maybe that leads into pick number 2, Jonah S.
Jonah S.
Who the Dolphins liked enough, obviously had enough of a conviction to trade up from 48 to 37, jumping the New England Patriots at 38, with the reports coming out later that they were debating between Jonah S. and Travion Henderson, the running back from Ohio State, who they ended up picking at 38. And I see a reflexive smile there. What was that about, friend?
Because I was thinking like Miami, I'm sure that they like had the itch to take Henderson as well, and I was just thinking that them adding a running back would have been hilarious at that point as well. But I like the addition of Savanaia. I think when you're looking at certainly, I mean, look, you go back to the day after the Dolphins lost, after their season ended, and listening to Chris Greer and listening to Mike McDaniel, and they echoed it, doubled down on it at the combine, where it's, hey, like it's time to invest in the offensive line. So I would have been surprised if they came out of round 1, round 2 without an offensive lineman, especially given the drop off in this class. And I do think that there was a pretty big tier break along the offensive line after Savanaia went off the board. And so I get trading up for him. Is he the most impressive physical specimen? No, Kenneth Grant is a more impressive physical specimen, but he's not quite the player that Savanaia is either. Like I think Savanaia is a little bit more of a polished blocker. I love the versatility, the fact that he's played tackle and guard, the fact that he's played left and right. That gives him a lot of flexibility moving forward with his usage and where he can kind of help them out moving forward. I do think he's a better guard than tackle. I think that's the more ideal landing spot. But again, just the fact that he has done it, that does give you a lot of flexibility moving forward.
The next interior offensive lineman selected after Jonah S. was Tate Ratledge, who went 57 to the Detroit Lions. How big of a gap, how much better of a prospect is Jonah than Tate Ratledge?
Let me see where I had Ratledge at. I had Ratledge pretty high. Give me one sec. So,
and not that it has anything to do with anything, but I would have minded Ratledge because he was such a trip at the combine in his podium.
Yes. He honestly, so I had them in the same bucket. The almost very similar grades. Now the difference is that Jonah is younger. Jonah has more position flexibility there, whereas Ratledge has really only played right guard over the course of his career. A little bit older, has been dinged up more. So I think if you're going to say like, all right, they have similar grades, like I had them pretty close. I probably liked Ratledge like a touch more, but I think if you're again like counting in all the other things in the profile, I could get to where you would have Jonah ahead of Ratledge overall.
Okay, and looking at the trade chart. The trade value charts, both from Jimmy Johnson back when, and there's a new one.
Yep.
The author of it, the creator of it, escapes me. My apologies. It's kind of a wash in terms of what they gave up to get him. But my eyes tell me that giving up a 3 and a 4, a 3 and a late 4 to move up 11 spots, and an early 5 seems like a lot.
It is a lot, especially like there's a lot of ways to look at this class when you have a class like this, which was lacking in top end talent, which was lacking in even depth in the middle. I think you look at this group, there were certain parts of the draft where it just felt dry. You got to middle, late second round, and it was like, man, I don't love any of the prospects here at this point in the draft, right? Every team's going to look at that differently because everyone's going to have different boards, and everybody they feel passionate about the players that they're bringing in. But I think that when you're looking at it, there's one way where you say, all right, we want to be aggressive, we're going to go up and get our guys. The other angle is, all right, we want to just have as many darts to throw as possible, and knowing like, all right, like not all these guys are going to hit. Maybe we don't love the ceiling for 10 of these players, but if 5 of them hit, then that's a good win. And so I think when you're looking at that approach, clearly the Dolphins felt the former way and said, all right, we're going to make a move up the board, make sure we get Jonah Savaiinaea and try and add him into the fold. He's a guy that represents kind of the end of a tier cliff there at that position.
Yeah, and as I said on the podcast earlier this week, right or wrong, this puts a big spotlight on Jonah S. to be good and to be good very early. Not unlike, and even though the situation was a bit different, but not unlike what happened in 2021 when the Dolphins traded up from 50 to 42, surrendering a 2022 third-round pick to the New York Giants to select Liam Eichenberg.
Right.
And that has not panned out. He's still on the roster 5 years later, but it's not panned out, if we're going to be honest about it. So Dolphins cannot have a repeat of that. That would not be good for roster building purposes.
And like Eichenberg, I would view the Savaiinaea as like high floor as opposed, like, I think the ceiling is fine. I think the ceiling is probably higher than Eichenberg's was coming out of Notre Dame. But like Eichenberg, it was like, all right, like we like his versatility. We like the floor there. He's not like an overwhelming physical talent, but we like his ability to kind of help us at a number of different spots. We're saying a lot of the same things here with Savaiinaea.
Yeah, and again, Eichenberg, like I said, he's back on the roster as a low cost. It's like $2 million backup who has starting experience and can play anywhere on the offensive line. To me, that's perfectly fine. And the nightmare of a lot of Dolphin fans that he'd be a starter again in 2025 has, for all intents and purposes, been eliminated, because it should be Jonah S. and James Daniels as your starting guards for the Dolphins. So let's move on to round 5, where the Dolphins had not 1, not 2, 3 picks. Jordan Phillips, and pardon me, it will never not make me laugh or smile that they drafted Jalen Phillips 10 years after they drafted Jordan Phillips. Jason Marshall Jr., Dante Trader Jr.
Yep.
First, very quick question. Obviously, one pick was picked higher than the others for a reason, but do you like one of those picks more than the others?
I would say of the 3, I probably like Trader the most. The guy that was selected the third out of that order. I would say it's probably Trader. Marshall and Phillips are pretty close. I would say it's probably Phillips over Marshall, but I would say they're pretty tight. To me, when I look at Trader, young senior, hasn't played a ton of football. He's got some versatility at the safety spot, can do a lot of different things for you. He went to the Senior Bowl. I thought he was solid down there over the course of the week of practice. A little bit under, like I expected more from an athletic profile. I think when I watched him on film, I thought he was pretty smooth. I thought that there was enough range there to kind of make plays from the post to be able to do different things. I mean, he ran mid 4.6s. The jumps were not very good. Just like the overall explosive numbers just were pretty underwhelming for a guy who's under 5'11" and 200 pounds. So that's why he falls to the later stages of day 3. But I think when you're looking at Trader, his film and his usage moving forward probably had me more excited than Jordan Phillips and with Jason Marshall.
Okay, interesting. The one thing that stands out, though, in every report you hear about Jordan Phillips is what, in terms of intangibles, that's the guy you want. It's a guy you want. And it's interesting that if you combine the 2 Jordan Phillipses, and if the Dolphins could do that,
right, as a top 10 pick.
I know, with the athletic profile of the previous Jordan Phillips, who, talk about dancing bear. I mean, I still remember I brought it up this week. There was a play in the 2016 opener against Seattle. He basically took the handoff of the running back. I mean, he was in the backfield like that, caused a fumble, Dolphins recovered, and it was like, holy, this was the start of his second year. And I'm thinking, whoa, we could have something big here. And then it disappears for 5 games. You don't see him.
And it's a credit to him that he's still like playing in the league, at this point. That just, to me, a credit to his talent. I remember he could do like a standing backflip at 320. I mean, he was just one of the craziest physical specimens at defensive tackle, certainly like at that point when he was coming out of the draft.
Yeah, and also the flip side, unfortunately, very frustrating, because you look at a guy and what could have been. Holy moly! Dolphins have, as we know, Not a lot of answers at cornerback. Is Jason Marshall's junior's upside high enough that is it ridiculous to suggest maybe he could even compete for a starting job as a rookie, or is that pushing it too far?
It's probably pushing it in my mind. I mean, I thought that he was solid the times that I've seen him live. You know, I saw him at the Shrine Bowl. I saw him at the Combine where he didn't do a full positional workout, but did go through some of the athletic testing. I think when you're looking at him, it's a like solid average physical player, and then I think when you're going like late round five or late in the fifth round, yeah, like, there are going to be some holes in his game. I worry a little bit about the lack of production. That's a position where I would like to be able to see that if you don't have overwhelming physical traits. And again, I don't think Marshall does. He's got a lack of length, so that ability to just kind of like find the ball, make plays on the football was worrisome for me. That said, I mean, I've been hearing about this guy for forever. You know me, like when I get to the combine, I'm not asking guys about players in this class. I'm asking for down the road. I've got notes in my on my sheet from Trey Dean in the March of 2023, the former Florida corner, saying like, yeah, he's going to be a guy to watch. Jason Marshall, Rashad Torrance in 2023, Jason Marshall, watch him down the line. And so a number of even a number of receivers from the SEC and from that schedule said like, yeah, this was one of the toughest guys I went up against in practice. So there is an element of that I think is certainly impressive, but to say that I'm going to go in and count on him to start probably strong. Now, is it like completely out of the question that he could vie for one of those roles and compete for one of those jobs? I don't think that's crazy either, but I don't think that I'm going in with that expectation going into camp.
Yeah, and I will testify if anybody ever asks to a friend asking prospects at the combine, who on your team is somebody that folks might not know who could catch some eyes coming back next season? And I always perk up and pay attention because it's a much better and different question than a lot of the questions we get. Um, and I won't even come up with example. There are a lot of the like run of the mill typical questions.
What
That's
would it
one.
be like to play for Mike Tomlin? Would that be like? Would you enjoy that? Hey, did you meet with Todd Bowles? Yeah, like, rather outside of that,
Exactly.
try and get as much as I can out of those guys.
Well, now that's become obligatory. Have you met with the Dolphins? Have you met with the Raiders? Have you met with the Steelers? That's become absolutely obligatory.
Yes.
I guess failing to realize that every prospect practically at one point or another is going to have some sort of meeting contact with every single
Right.
team in the NFL. So, little sidebar here because you mentioned we were talking about cornerbacks and Jason Marshall and the Dolphins have an opening again. They need some help at cornerback. Darius Slay, who was released by the Eagles, has signed with the Steelers. Unless I'm severely mistaken, James Bradbury is still on the market.
Yep.
Is he somebody Dolphins would be wise to think of to consider, or is that ship sailed for his?
Yeah, I mean, he missed all of last season with an injury, and didn't. Obviously, the year before the 2023 season was he did not look good. Now, what's been interesting with James Bradbury, number one, like character is awesome, like A+ character. His instincts, his ball skills, all very very strong. What's interesting, kind of following his career, because remember he started in Carolina, it was like a day 2 pick, and it was a little bit up and down. But then he had that big year and a contract year, gets signed by New York, goes to the Giants, and again was kind of like ping ponging back and forth. They would have a good year, then a down year, and then he ended up getting cut. Like it was after the draft. It was in June of that 2022 season. The Eagles pick him up, and he was an all-pro. He was outstanding that season, opposite Darius Slay. And then you come back in 2023, and he was not great again. So, if you want to kind of take a roll of the dice, and you say, all right, well, maybe he's going to bounce back here. I would say, having not played at all last year, and then having that down year in 2023, it's been now two full seasons since we've seen not even like high quality play, but like just like solid play from James Bradbury. So while I wouldn't like completely rule it out, that would be another one where that's just a dart throw at this point in the process. He was getting moved to safety, so there's like how much athleticism, how much juice does he have left in the tank?
Okay, so we heard it here first. That's the next over there, and maybe that's a subtle hint to the Dolphins. Wait, this is something I think the Dolphins should consider at the X because maybe Stephon Gilmore's out there, Rasul Douglas is out there, but who knows? Okay, let's get back to the draft. Ollie Gordon, the second Doak Walker Award winner in 2023. The stats took a nosedive in 2024.
Yep.
Some of that per draft analyst is bad offensive line, shaky quarterback play. May not have looked quite the same either, though. Correct?
Yeah, I honestly I was taken aback by how bad the film did look. And he had off-field incidents that, going back to last summer, like right before the season. It was like right before media day. Like they were getting ready to leave. And that's when I think I believe it was a DUI, don't go away, or something along those lines. And so it was like weird, kind of tumultuous going into the season. And then just obviously that whole Oklahoma State offense really fell off. But Ollie Gordon himself just didn't look great. Now, you go to the Senior Bowl. I thought he was solid. He had some moments there, but I was a little surprised that he got drafted. I thought that he might go undrafted just because of how the season went. But this is a player that had outstanding production for his first 2 years at Oklahoma State. So at the end of the day, like I get why the Dolphins took a swing. You might look at this and say, all right, we don't want to try and get into a bidding war for his services. And this is a guy that broke out at an early age. So let's get him into the fold and see if we can reclaim that talent we saw a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and if he does nothing else but produce in short yardage situations as competition for Alexander Madison, their free agent acquisition from the Raiders, again, it's a 6th-round pick.
I think that's fine. Yep.
Okay. Let's quickly move on to the 7th round. I got to make sure also before we wrap this up, I got to get your take because everybody has to have a take on what happened with Shedeur Sanders. But before we get to that,
can't wait.
Yeah. So before we get to that, the Dolphins did draft a quarterback, that being Quinn Ewers from Texas, previously Ohio State, who is a great system fit because that's what he played at Texas. Has some traits, but again, went in the 7th round, and usually there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean the film's up and down. There are some really good flashes. The decision making in certain areas that definitely left you wanting more. I would say that. I mean, this is a guy that has just struggled to stay healthy, right? I mean, it's funny because I'm not someone that gets into like the agent game and like talking with and having those conversations, but I know like talking with other people that are close with his agency, and it was like, oh, like. He was always hurt. So what if he's healthy? I'm like, yeah, he was always hurt. that was a problem. The fact that he could never, even going back to high school, like it was just that he was constantly dealing with something. Now I give him a lot of credit, for honestly, like the big thing, obviously you had the whole Arch Manning of everything, going in and him fighting through that last year and continuing to try and perform. Then he gets hurt. It was the torn oblique that he was dealing with, from midseason on. Arch comes in, plays well. He guts his way back and he's clearly fighting through it. You could see like there were certain throws where he just could not step in, like torque and through the football and really kind of drive it. And then there would be a throw like late in the game in crunch time. I think of like Arizona State in the bowl game where he was just like, I'm just going to grit through it and just fire this thing. And you could just kind of see like, yeah, he's fighting through pain. So I give him a lot of credit there. Obviously the film's up and down. If the film's not up and down, he's not going in the 7th round or in the 7th round. Yeah. So me personally, when I finished my evaluation, I was like, yeah, like I would have loved to see him go back to school. I'm of the opinion that all these quarterbacks like should exhaust every single ounce of eligibility that they can, outside of the obvious, blue chip. Yeah, go and get paid, man. Like go get paid on with NIL. From what I understood, like the dollar amount for Quinn Ewers was like millions of dollars, and now he's going to make exponentially less than that as a 7th round pick. I know that there were people talking, oh, he could go late 2nd round, 3rd round. It was just unrealistic. And so to me, like I was a bad choice to come out. But obviously everybody makes those calls on their own. So we'll see. I like the fit as well. To your point, I think it's a very easy transition going from what they did with Sark at Texas. I'm sure that there's some similar language and some things that Tua can kind of show him from a nomenclature standpoint to help with that. I like the fit. So it's a good situation.
What's your ceiling for him?
I think that there is something there. I ended up giving him a grade that's more like high end backup, potential low end starter. And that's better than where he got drafted, right? Like, so I like the value here for the Dolphins. I thought that he should go earlier. Like if he went 5th round, if he went 4th round, that would not have been out of bounds in my opinion. Like if some team had taken him in the 4th round, I would not have thought that was crazy at all.
You liked him better as a prospect coming out than former Dolphins 7th-round pick quarterback Skylar Thompson?
Yes, I do. Especially look, given what the scheme looks like. Like I think it's a really good scheme fit that way. Skylar Thompson, like there were things to like, but I think that there's a little bit more upside here when you talk about Quinn Ewers.
Okay, and the last pick, Zeke Biggers, who's biggers than most prospects.
Yeah.
It has to be done. You can't
Yeah.
say his name without making that pun.
No.
Actually moves very well for a guy who's very big, and yet production wasn't there at Georgia Tech.
No, production wasn't there. Looks the part. I remember seeing him at the Shrine Bowl and writing down like this kid looks like your prototypical 5 technique. Now he's been mostly a nose tackle at Georgia Tech, and I think that potential position versatility will play really, really well in Anthony Weaver's scheme. And so when I look at that, I think that is valuable. We've seen guys go through that Raven system, and when you have that length and that stoutness that he's got. I think that will play really well. He doesn't need to be like this productive workhorse up front for them. He can be a key cog in the rotation as long as he can continue to just improve from a technique standpoint. Natural issues with leverage. His hands weren't always clean. So I think if you straighten some of those things up, I think this guy can develop into a nice rotational piece in the back end of the depth chart.
Which would be perfectly fine for a 7th-round pick. This is
absolutely.
And he fits my profile of a 7th-round, generally speaking, is find me a prospect that's got something that stands out physically. Yes. There's obviously flaws in his game. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a 7th-round pick, and then see if you can develop him. And
exactly right. A lot of teams, you look at it one of two ways. You're either in that camp, or it's give me like the high floor, like or I know the role that this guy's going to come in and he's going to be our 4th linebacker and a special teamer. This guy's going to be our those kind of specialty roles. He'll be our 4th receiver, blocker, special teamer, those kinds of things. I tend to be more on your side of it, where I'd rather have unusual size or speed, or there's some kind of element to the body type that can set you apart from other guys that are going to be at that part of the draft.
That's why I like this guy. There are a lot of reasons. That's one of them right there. Okay, let's wrap it up, because again, this wouldn't be a draft discussion if we don't mention Shedeur Sanders. Your overall take, where did you have him? Did you have him projected?
Yeah, I had him falling out of the first round in my last mock. I would say like my grade on Shedeur didn't really change from 2023 to 2024. And I had him. Let me pull it up real fast. I had him just inside my top 50. So he was my 49th ranked player going into the draft. Basically, it was like low-end starter, great backup type of ceiling. And I thought that it would take him some time to get there. And now I knew I was low on him coming in. And it was like, okay, watching him this year, there were some flashes early, but I thought that the bad habits really just kind of took hold over the course of this season. And the film was very up and down. And then, going to the combine, going to the Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, having conversations with people around the league, I couldn't find anyone that loved him. And, we're talking like coaches and scouts, anyone I talked with was like, I liked it, but I didn't love what I saw this year. Cam Ward, clear QB1. And then just talking with other like people in the media over the course of that time at the combine, it's like, did you talk to anybody that loved Shedeur's film? And you didn't talk to it. So it was like, like, I wonder, like, are we going to start talking about him potentially sliding? And that talk just never really took hold. Like, some people had him dropping, and it was like, you saw like latter stages of round 1. And then eventually, more people started having him fall out of the first round altogether. Him falling to round 5 was not something I anticipated. That was certainly like worst case scenario, but I think it's just kind of a culmination of a lot of factors there, both, with the film not going great, and then the pre-draft process was not kind to Shedeur. And I think that when you're looking at it, I think it's a good learning point for other players, when they're coming out for the draft, just something to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. And I'll say it. If you're too polite to say it, you're not bigger than the game, dude. Nobody's bigger than the game. Don't come in thinking like, you're lucky for me to let you interview me at this point. And there's too much of that's come out to believe that that's not right. That was a big part of it. And again, his father was one of the greatest athletes who ever played in the NFL. Unfortunately, was lacking in the humility department, and that's passed on to his kids. And his kids, unfortunately, not quite the same kind of athlete.
Yeah, and that's at the end of the day, like when you're talking physical traits, like all right, the traits weren't there, the film was kind of up and down, and if the interviews weren't great, that kind of left you like, all right, well, what are we talking about here at the end of the day? Now, again, like I still felt that there's upside there to become a starter. I could see that path, but I knew like it was going to take some time, and so that's why I had him lower because I take positional value into account when I'm stacking these players. And so if I think you've got the like. I had Bo Nix as a top 5 player going into last year, or he was a top 10 player on my board last year because I'm like, all right, like, yeah, he's not going to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Like he's not that guy. But if you are the 17th best quarterback in the NFL, that is a valuable asset
Right.
for an NFL team. And so again, that kind of reflects like I thought there was Bo Nix and like I had Shedeur Sanders in a clump below that. So and a tier below that. And so yeah, it was just again just kind of a perfect storm of factors there that led to him falling the way that he did.
Yeah, and he's not a bad prospect, but he's not good enough to deal with the attitude and with the potential headaches presented by who he is and who his father is. We're going to be honest about it because not like Dion. If there are things going on that he doesn't like, it's not like Dion's going to bite his tongue and and let those coaches, that organization deal with that situation the way they think they should.
Right,
That's
exactly right.
Okay, we're going to. I lied. There was one more thing because you covered the Eagles as well, and the Eagles. Should we assume that they kicked ass as usual and they landed with Jihad Campbell in the first round when the guy was projected maybe top 15, if not for the injury concern?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting pick just because it's been like it was like several years before I was born when the Eagles last selected a linebacker in the first round of the draft. So they definitely are going against their type there, but Vic Fangio, obviously that's a position that is very important to his defense, and also I think the added potential versatility for Jihad Campbell as a rusher. I think was also a big factor in that decision as well. We'll see what that looks like. Is he going to be off ball first and then transition to the edge? Is he going to come in and be an edge guy right off the bat? The fact that they were talking about trading up for him with the Chargers at 22, that again, like makes me think like they're probably looking at him as more of an edge rusher, but from what I gather so far, like no, he's going to start it outside or started off ball linebacker and then move from there. So we'll see. I'm excited to see what this looks like for him moving forward. But certainly it was by all accounts like a top 20 player in this draft. Everybody valued him that way. It was just the durability concerns, the shoulders were a big factor in why he fell.
Yeah, and the way things are working out these days, he's not going to have any injury concerns when he plays with the Eagles. That's just the way. That's just the way it's falling right now. It's like they've become they've become that franchise or one of them anyway. So that's going to wrap it up. As always, a big thanks to my man here, friend Duffy. Catch his fine work on all PLHY.
PHLY. We're almost there.
Yeah, Philly PHLY, as well as the All City Network for his draft coverage. You see his Twitter handle, or if you're listening on the audio podcast, it's at FDuffyNFL. Please like, subscribe, share. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. We're going to be back Monday for episode 500. If news breaks over the weekend, there will be a quick recap episode, but it's not going to have a number, so 500 will stay Monday. So anyway, having said all that, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. Thanks again, friend.